Hi guys, just give me 1 minute here. So yeah, thank you for joining on a Saturday. I know it's rather long evening actually. And my name is Srinivas. I work with a company called Prequin, and I work as a front-end engineer, obviously, because why would I be at a React.js conference otherwise? And yeah, so I want to talk a bit about something I've been experimenting with for a while now. A couple of issues, things that I feel that could have been better, right? So server-side rendering with microfrontends, that's a mouthful. Now, basically, I just want to cover a few things: microfrontends in general, microfrontends with server-side rendering, the problems that microfrontends solve, require tech stacks and tooling that comes along with it, and basically the composition of microfrontends, right? So it could be server-side, it could be client-side, mostly, and inter-micro app communications. This is basically what I want to cover today. So, why use microfrontends in the first place, right? Like all this tooling and there's Next.js, all of that good stuff. But when you have a team of 200 plus engineers, you know how crazy it gets on a Friday night. When you want to leave to a pub and your boss is like, code फट गया, right? तो मैं क्या करूँ? तेरा code था. So you're like, okay, I'll do a hotfix, and then you end up working in the hotfix, and finally you get to the pub, and you're not so happy about it. So if you were and also the fact that there's a code freeze, you have to merge in the release branch and all of that stuff. So that's the reason micro frontends are a good thing. It does come with a bit of effort, but it's worth it. So why use micro frontends? Obviously, because we have multiple teams working independently. We don't want to rely on one team to push their code and then you write on top of it. It's more maintainable and reduced code. Depends, but mostly that is the case. Independence and autonomy, you don't have to talk to anybody that you will be changing a part of code which they maintain for some reason. So it is your code and it resides in probably a poly repo, or you have a mono repository with learner. Ideally, those are the two cases, right? So scalability and performance, if done correctly, it would be a great benefit. Just micro frontends, not even with SSR. And the possibility of using different technologies. It is crazy to think about using Svelte with React, but it is possible. Once in a while, we do all indulge in the occasional Svelte on a Saturday, even though we do work on React.js from Monday to Friday. We've all been there. So client-side composition is quite simple. You have a bunch of JavaScript and HTML, which kind of gets bundled on the client side. Nothing too fancy. This is what we've kind of been dealing with from day one since we've picked up React.js, right? Then comes a server-side composition. It's an assembled page. So we have different teams working on different parts of the page. We can call them fragments here. And these fragments basically get composed into a single page, but not on the client side, but rather on the server side, right? I'm talking about server-side composition. The server-side rendering is slightly different than this. So server-side composition will take care of building the page, but there's no guarantee that it's going to build the React.js application into HTML for you, right? That you have to rehydrate on your own. So you'd be like, why all this stuff? Why do I have to kind of go through all this? Sometimes you might feel, right? And to kind of understand, break it down into simple pieces. Every server-side micro frontend that is out there, just a few, but I'll name them in a bit, but it all comes down to these components. We have a routing engine, we have a layout service, we have fragments, right, which are individual components which are going to make up the page at some point. And then you have backend API calls, which could be a part of the fragment itself. Right, so this is basically it. You have a routing engine, you have a layout service, you have fragments. Layout service, you can think of it like pages, and fragments are nothing but your individual components that make up the page. And routing service literally routes what URL should be mapped to which layout service, and then vice versa. Right? So you might wonder why not Next.js. It's such a beautiful framework, but there is no SSR support, sadly. They use something called as module federation, and this is the plight right now. What we have, we don't have support for having proper server-side rendering support with microfrontends. So if you are a big company, you have a lot of engineers working, probably that's the reason your engineering manager is like, I don't want to look at Next.js right now, because it just won't scale for you, right? And it's paid. It's $100 a month. It is hard making a living out of open source, but it is still not time tested. It says it's a proprietary code, right? And yeah, so that is the plight with Next.js. So there's a lot of abstraction that goes along, right? With all the tooling we have, every software, like Webpack has so much of abstraction. I don't think I've ever opened the Webpack file in a couple of months now, right? You usually don't go there. It's something that you kind of do and you just forget about it, and you just expect it to work. The only time you wanted to look at it is when there's a Webpack upgrade or something. So abstractions are good, but too much of abstraction can kind of make things not so easy to kind of handle, right? So I was looking for a solution which had all of these things, which had support for microfrontends with server-side rendering, and I kind of looked at a couple of options, and what I concluded was there's this company called Namecheap. Might have heard about them. So they have open sourced a solution called Isomorphic Layout Composer. Quite a mouthful again, but what it is a bunch of tooling softwares, not written in Node mostly, and it's also uses single spar. If you remember, microfrontends were based on single spar as original as it is. And TailorX, I'll come to that. So TailorX is our layout service. So it is based off another open source solution that is no longer maintained for some reason from a company called Zolando. It was originally called Tailor. So Namecheap picked that up, saw value in it, and they have been maintaining it, but not. So there are a few bugs, right? And they give you server-side rendering support out of the box. They have a built-in registry to add new apps, pages, change configs, templates in just a few clicks, and possibility of using different technologies. Obviously, you can use Vue, Svelte, and React together in a microfrontend. The stack would really not care. Like, obviously, you would say that how would I kind of share my state? If you have a microfrontend and if you want to share your state, then you should not be using microfrontends, right? You might want to talk to the microfrontend layouts, right? You want to talk to another microfrontend. So originally, this was a problem, and then they said, okay, why are we looking at? We have the event listeners. Just emit the events and filter the events out, and that's as easy as that, right? If you wanted to enter microfrontend communication for some reason. TailorX, as I said, is a layout service. It uses streams. So streams are much better. So you don't have to wait for a particular page to kind of load up, and then it kind of gets to the browser. So it does this cool thing called streams, but it's not something very fancy. Node.js has this, so if you want to build something like this, you could build it on your own using an Express.js server. So streaming composition. So if you look at this diagram here, you see that there's an assembly that happens after all the components are in, then the final thing goes out. Then you have partial rendering, where you send out when, and then whatever comes in, you just send it to the browser. And sometimes what happens with this case is some stuff don't really load on the page, and the user's not really happy about it. Then comes the streaming response. Think of this like your Netflix. You do have a when you watch a video, you get what you need initially, and then the rest of the thing buffers, right? Something on those lines. And then they use single spar router and adapters, ILC. So single spar is a routing engine. It does one thing and only one thing, which is routing. And as important as it is, it also gives us the support to hydrate your layout service, right? So ILC basically has these adapters that kind of hooks into single SPA as a plugin, and each language has its own adapter. So right now, I think the most active ones are Vue and React. So a worthy mention would be Podium lib. Quite well maintained, really well documented. I'll get to this in a bit. The reason I say this is a good take on this is because most of the things what Zolando built with a project called Mosaic 9. I'll get to all the softwares in a bit. Mosaic 9. So they built on those architectures, right? So Podium lib is worth a check. And the possibilities with doing microfrontends on with SSR is that we sometimes kind of forget that we have all this computing power that's sitting in AWS, and why do we kind of just not use it? And AWS Edge, Lambda Edge, just like a CDN, can have functions that get invoked closest point to your user's request. So obviously, if your APIs are quick, because with server side you would expect your JSON or your API calls to bundle together and then be sent to the client side. So that's a big win. So Podium lib has an easy server-side composition for microfrontends. But yes, Podium lib does not do one thing, which is hydrating. So it does not take care of your React application being hydrated. It does not take care of your React application being stringified and converted to HTML. That you have to do on your own, which is not too difficult. But yes, I have been facing some trouble, some issues there. But that's mostly it. Let me get to some of these softwares I was talking about. If I can just share my screen again. And I do have a demo on how easy it is to create a microfrontend. Sorry, how easy it is to create a React server-side render. I don't know what I did.
Yeah.
Did I close it? No. Sorry guys. Just dumbed out there for a bit. I closed it.
Really closed. Okay.
Yeah. So while this sets up, also there's an issue with, how we treat some of the libraries on GitHub. If it's older than a year, we judge the library like anything. We would be like, hey, he doesn't maintain this library, why not just look for another one? Even though that library has been good all those years, instead of actually posting an issue or trying to see if we can fix it or do a simple upgrade on libraries, because maintainers don't get paid to do this mostly. And that's a case with some of the best softwares I've seen. Like Mosaic 9 was a brilliant software stack. One second. Yeah. So Mosaic project was a brilliant software stack. So Taylor X that I just spoke about, which is a part of ILC from Namecheap, is actually originally picked up from here. And it's not been maintained for a while now, for about 4 years. But Zolando still uses it for their website. And if you guys have not about Zolando, Zolando's like Myntra, but they're like really huge in Europe. They have they've probably passed 2 billion revenue, so they're huge. And the tech stacks look something like this. Like I said, it's basically a routing engine connected to a layout service, and then you have your fragments. It's as simple as that. And if you have time in your company, like I was just talking to Bulkit, and he told me that one of his seniors, about 2 years ago, he wrote an entire layout service that kind of hydrates and kind of provides you with the server-side rendering. Right? So it is possible. The problem with JavaScript is you need to do a lot of tooling. And you're not comfortable with doing tooling because most of the tooling that you do in Node.js is not performant. We don't look for alternatives like Go, right, which is easily shippable and stuff. We're just too comfortable with JavaScript, right? And have you guys used? How many of you used ES build? Sorry, Snowpack ES build. Brilliant, right? The performance is crazy. It's, I don't know what X good, but I hate Webpack. Right? Come on, we've all been there where you've been waiting for your test cases to complete. If you have a huge legacy code base, guys, trust me, it's going to drive you crazy. So all those things, we don't do a lot of tooling, and this beautiful project got kind of put in a back seat. If you see, Innkeeper is not even being maintained. It's been 6 years. There have been 5 issues. Skipper somehow kind of maintained to an extent because they use it internally for the Skipper, sort of like your reverse proxy engine. You're like your Nginx, right? It's written in Go and it's very performant. You can use it for like all kinds of stuff, ingress controllers and things. ILC, this is the one I was talking about. Quite good. Looks. I do have a bit of issues with setting up the demo. It uses a slightly older version of Node, but it is quite good compared to everything out there. Right? It promises SSR out of the box. It has single spar and it uses Taylor X. So they call it Isomorphic Layout Composer. So they have single spar, Taylor X, and they have parcel plugins, app wrappers, and all kinds of good stuff, right? So like I said, same thing with this is you have a routing engine, you have a layout service, you have fragments, and that's mostly it, right? And Taylor X is a separate project on its own. Even this project is not that well maintained. It's been about 3 years since you saw last commit, but it is what it is, right? Not many updates go there. And yeah, some of these issues with tooling, right, is mostly because we don't take the effort to kind of build something. We always look for, hey, was React going to ship something for us, or is because React is, we like React because there's less abstraction. Come on, because it's just a library. We like to glue things together, and even though it's it never breaks. Like I've seen guys work on React.js codebase as old as 7 years. It doesn't break, right? Angular JS to Angular, you know how horrible that was, right? It literally broke 98% of your code base. Nobody really knew what was happening. That was a lot of loss for companies. So yeah, Next.js is quite promising. There's also another alternative called Remix, which is too good to believe. It almost feels like magic if anybody's kind of looked through their website. It literally feels like magic. I don't even know what's happening behind. Too much of abstraction. But yes, like somebody said, it's not a silver bullet. Next.js or Remix or anything for that stuff. So you basically end up taking something which is out there, which works for you, and start tooling on top of it and maintain it for your company or for your personal projects, right? And streaming composition is a great idea. Like, that kind of adds a lot of value. I don't even know why I'm showing you this. So yeah, so streaming composition, look into that. I do have a demo, but maybe I'll just share it on the GitHub repo. It's basically just a Express.js server talking to a React.js application, hydrating it. Nothing fancy there. It's as easy as that. It's so DOM server. Basically, React documentation says that if you want to do server-side rendering, you use a DOM server, do stringify, and then do stringify on the server side, and then on the client side you do hydrate, right? And that's mostly it. It takes you hardly a couple of lines of code to put it together, but yes, there is a lot of tooling on top of that. It is simple to put together a simple application like this, but it does take effort to kind of put a tooling like Taylor and Nginx. Like server-side rendering is not a new thing actually to the. So BigPipe, if anyone's heard about BigPipe that Facebook launched in 2009, sort of did something of that sort, right? And Mosaic 9, it's about 6 years old, started around the open source in 2016. So people do it with Java, server-side rendering is done in Node.js and all kinds of languages. It's just that there's a lot of tooling that needs to be done, and also the fact that we don't like to deal with DevOps, right? Nobody wants to write a CI/CD pipeline, at least not most of my colleagues who are front-end engineers. But I think we should take effort in writing some CI/CD pipelines. Be comfortable with AWS because finally it does reside in AWS. That's where your real performance does come from, right? We do all of this stuff on browser, but we forget that if your APIs are not loading on time, it's still going to slow your site down, right? And yeah, that's mostly it. Any questions? Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
good evening.
Good evening.
So basically, when we do SSR,
Yeah.
the thing is, when the code is sent to the client side, we actually do hydration, right?
Yes.
So in one of the articles that I read, it basically said that hydration is an overhead because when we do SSR, the event listeners are binded to
Yes.
the HTML and then sent. But again, the same thing is done again on the client side as well.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And there's no other way around it because
Yeah,
you
so-
have to have event listeners on top. But what Microfrontends does help you is with not the event listeners, that's inevitable because you have to have those. And if you have a proper lifecycle for these event listeners, it's not going to be an overhead. That's always the case, right? Like we forget to unsubscribe from so many events, and it eventually, like a simple debounce on an input box or I don't know, screen resize. If we really don't unsubscribe, we forget sometimes, right? If you don't have a proper utility function which kind of does these things for you, it is going to be overhead. But where Microfrontends with SSR really gives you a boost is when you're having this huge chunk of JSON that you want to fetch, right? You don't want your client side to take care of that. You rather do it on the server side. Like what Next.js does is it allows you to take this chunk of JSON, right, from your server or GraphQL, whatever, and push that to the browser along with the page. So the composition is really powerful because and the layout painting is powerful. Everything falls in place because you have so many things happening parallelly in the server, but here it's not so performant because you're running on literally a single threads, right? Unless and until you really you can't even use web workers for a lot of things, right? So it's always good to use for these conditions. But yes, there is an overhead, but there's always a workaround.
So yeah, basically from what I read, there is this something called resumability, basically where we serialize these event listeners in the
Yes.
server and do it. So I was wondering if it's possible to use resumability with SSR.
Well, I don't think there's currently anything of that sort, but I do remember that there was a project called Lit, if you remember. These were web components from Google. They were called Lit components. Yeah. So they do have something of that sort. But for some reason that project did not kick off. There are a few companies are using it, but that kind of microcontrol, if you want, you will have to tool it on your own. But I'm not really sure if there's anything out there which is like ready.
Thank you.
Any other questions, guys? Okay. Thank you, guys.